Tonight we've got Tony talking on the mysteries of science, so that should be very enlightening or mysterious. We've got some of our program for the rest of the year here, but if you've got your name in the book, you should get on the email list and Charmaine will let you know what's happening. So our next study group, which is on the 25th of September, usually only members go to the study group, but because we're going to try and go along to Cinema of the Soul, which is in Watton Scott Street. Yeah, Royal Exchange. A lot of you might not know where that is, but you can Google it. And it's a theatre that's about 2 blocks up. And maybe we should send out email details before it, so I'll talk to Charmaine about that. But for the cost of about $5, you can go along and see a movie run by Cinema for the Soul. And they are having a movie on Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now and Conversations with God. And so we have bumped Brendan's talk, and Eckhart Tolle's taking precedence, so that's for the 25th. And our public lecture for October is Philip, and he's talking on the application to systems theory to ourselves and our place in the universe. That sounds very complex. So we're looking forward to that.
Thanks for letting up with that.
Yeah, sounds like you're going to start.
I'm going to say now I feel really dumb.
Then our October study group, we're going to have Brendan, and Brendan's talking on higher forms of reality. Then November, our public lecture is Philip Lloyd, and Philip, you're doing the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita. So any of you who aren't members are welcome to come along to the second Friday of the month, our public lecture, which is here. And so that will be the applications to systems theory, and then the November one is introduction to Bhagavad Gita. And then for members, Diane will be doing the study group November meeting on the Great White Sisterhood. So Charmaine's got a couple of little announcements, and so I'll let you just watch us on those things.
Good evening, everybody. For members of the Society, I just remind you all that the annual fees for 2009-2010 are due. So, it's nice if that's cleared up fairly quickly. I remind members that there is a convocation meeting in Sydney, and a sheet did go out with our latest publication, reminding people that they can go if they make an application to go. And I remind you all to keep your emails up to date, please, because I don't want to be sending out emails that come back to me. And for the present, I can't think of anything else. So I hope you enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Charmaine. Okay. So we're welcoming Tony tonight, and he's talking on the mysteries of science. The Theosophical Society promotes the study of the timeless wisdom and teachings, the brotherhood of human beings, the study of science, religion and philosophy, and the unexplained laws of nature. What else am I missed? And the powers latent in the human being. So our talks usually follow along with those topics. Members have complete freedom to follow their own dogmas, teachings and beliefs. So the views of any speaker should be regarded as their own views and are not binding on any members, and we're all free to accept or reject any teachings that you hear tonight. And you might want to do that respectfully and politely, and Tony will let you know if he wants questions held to the end of the talk. Thanks, Tony.
I'll be there in a second. Can't see the thing. There you go.
Well, good evening everyone, and thank you President Therese for having me give this lecture, and also congratulations to Therese for once again taking the role of President. So,
And Charmaine.
and Charmaine for Secretary once again, so
And you,
congratulations.
in your
Me once
absence
again
in the
for
library.
So, thank you. Now, I'm on the damn wrong side, aren't I? This is going to be hard.
Do you want that wheel?
It might be the best way. It's my camera. Now, of course, I'm not going to be on that thing now, am I?
Turn it towards you.
Dad, do you want me to do the channel later?
Yeah. It's,
Little green lights flashing, is that okay?
it all depends whether you can see the top.
I can see you, yep.
Well, I'm not supposed to get in front of that. So in a moment, anyway, I'll explain what that thing is. It does actually say it down there, but it's very hard to read. How's it joking?
Pretty good.
Okay, so tonight I wanted to talk to you about one of my passions, which is science, and more particularly the relentless advancement of technology and just how far back in time it actually began. Now, science as we know it is a relatively new phenomenon, but having just uttered those words, even though science as a subject did not exist, knowledge did. Does that make sense? Oh, I think I've even got that written down where you see, you can see what I was saying. I just didn't want you to see that I was actually reading it. So, word for word. Okay, so defining my topic tonight, you're probably aware that psychologists, social scientists and teachers, for example, are taught that we as humans when we become toddlers, we begin to explore our little universe. Now, we have become little scientists, observing and mimicking the things we see and experience. Now, I'm sorry if you can't see that, it's probably a bit low there. Okay, so one of the first things we explore is ourselves. Do you mean that thing waving at the end of my over there is actually a part of me? And what is me anyway? And that person staring back at me is me. Don't be fooled. Recognising yourself in the mirror is not a trait that every creature is capable of doing. Have you ever noticed or seen video footage of a dog chasing its tail? Or of a dog attacking its own tail when the dog thinks that the tail is about to steal the dog's food? I saw that recently on one of those, what is it, video? Funniest home videos, yeah. I don't watch the show very often. The last time I really watched it was when... What was his name? Have you ever noticed or seen video footage done that right? Psychologist Piaget viewed infants and children as little scientists born with a drive to make sense of the world. Now consider the fact that children are constantly experimenting. The point is we all start out as scientists. Otherwise we would not acquire language, movement or understanding the world around us. Blinded by science. This is me. Oops. Science is one of those subjects that tries extremely hard to justify itself. For the most part, it's about measuring things and trying to make theory that fits the measurements. You've all heard of the theory of relativity, that gem that was delivered to us by a school dropout who had difficulty understanding mathematics and who became a clerical worker at the patent's office. Somehow he overcame his difficulty, and Albert Einstein grew to understand advanced mathematical formulae and consequently became the great scientist of world renown. This in itself was one of the mysteries of science, as far as I'm concerned. Now what we all need to keep in mind is that all science is theory, and is only as good as the next theory to come along. Now few of us question the validity of science. We often blindly accept the words of scientists as gospel. The question of justifying their existence is the need to keep building on the theories that they have developed in order to maintain their tenure. According to scientists, particularly astronomers, up until a couple of years ago, there were 9 planets in our solar system. Now, a few years ago, I can't remember exactly when now, poor old Pluto was given the boot and is now considered to be a planetoid. That is, a very, very small planet. Or I suppose I should have said more like a small piece of rock or something cold. So, in a few moments, I'll give you a few examples of what I consider to be scientific mysteries. And yes, I'll explain the image of the handout for this lecture. But first, let's travel back in time. That was close. Doesn't want to do it? Do it? Yes? Yeah. Okay. Generally speaking, the human race has a human-centric approach to reality and thus fails to understand the meaning of existence, which is measured not by physical measurements, but by opening the mind to the concept of the oneness of the universe on both a physical and ethereal or non-physical level. Now, this is my belief, by the way. Scientists believe that we, the human race, have reached the pinnacle of our evolution. They believe this because they reason that we have reached such a point in our evolution where our environment is now so regimented by us that we no longer need to evolve. However, might it not be that evolution is about our genetic makeup and that genes continue to switch on and off, perhaps changing one feature of humans every 20 to 30 generations? Unfortunately, none of us will have the ability or opportunity to see the results of such an evolutionary process to prove the case one way or the other. Does that make sense? It's nice if something makes sense.
Been watching that film.
Yeah.
Which?
TV last
The
week.
voyage, what is it, the greatest voyage in the name? They said exactly that.
What was the program?
It was about Darwin's theory of evolution. They were basically saying that it was wrong.
I must have
And
changed
they were
it.
saying exactly what that says about switching on and off.
I must
In the animal sense.
I must have channeled it.
You must have.
Now I can't get it to go again. Do. Excuse me. Where are you? There. Now to digress. I also point out in my mind that genetic makeup, like us, is both physical and ethereal. So that as we have an ethereal double, it follows that we have an ethereal genetic makeup, which therefore mirrors our physical genetic makeup. But I digress, as I mentioned. Now, I'll just mention a little bit about what I understand of the concept of theosophical evolution, if I can find this thing again. Should have changed the colour, shouldn't I? Now, Theosophy tells us that its form of evolution is somewhat different from that postulated by science. In science, we collectively crawled out of the swamps and over the eons evolved into humans. In Theosophy, yes, we evolve, but we do not do so individually. And as this particular but we do so individually. And as this particular universe awakens and unfolds, we must experience life in each of the 4 types of life. We must firstly experience existence as mineral, then as plant, then as animal, and ultimately as human. Each of these experiences of existence unfold over millions, perhaps even billions of years, giving us the opportunity to experience many different forms of life. I liken this concept to being the manager of a store. In order to operate the store efficiently, you must know how to perform every job in the store in order to obtain be able to train your employees effectively. So ultimately, and I stress there is nothing ultimate in theosophy, we keep getting promoted into higher and higher forms of life in charge of our planet, our solar system, our galaxy, our group of galaxies, our quadrant in space, and then we create our own universe, creating our own Big Bang ad infinitum, as we continue to be promoted up the line until we finally unite as the one that we truly are. Is that okay for the philosophers amongst us? I'm trying to put it in a non-theosophical terminology. Now, sorry?
We're going to let you go this time.
We'll let you know this time. Now, I just wanted to bring up, if I can find it.
Use the arrow keys.
Oh, bugger. You're right, Brendan. Use the arrow keys.
Is that in
cars.
PowerPoint?
Now, I don't know how many of you know much about electric cars, but here is something I found about the history of the electric car. Now, unfortunately, I haven't got the email site there, but all you have to do is really Google the history of electric cars, and you'll find, well, do any of you have an idea of a date without actually looking up here? Although that up there says 1890 to something or other, in effect, the first electric cars were invented and built in the 1830s. 1832 and 1839. It's not sure exactly what year it was, but it was somewhere around there. And a fellow by the name of Robert Anderson of Scotland invented the first crude electric carriage. A small-scale electric car was designed by Professor something or other of Rennie in Holland, and built by his assistant. Oh, that's pretty good, isn't it? Christopher Becker in 1835. Practical and more successful electric wave vehicles were invented by both American Thomas Davenport and Scotsman Robert Davidson around 1842. So they've certainly been around quite a long time. The thing is, they died out shortly after the combustion engines took over in the early 1900s. The reason for that, of course, was because the combustion engine cars were faster, they were more robust, they could do more things. For that reason, unfortunately, such cars didn't do as well as what they perhaps could have. Had they still been a part of mainstream, the mainstream car industry from 1830s onwards, could you imagine the kind of car we have now by comparison to what we had? These hybrid things, which really aren't electric cars, they're just hybrids. But that's one of the things that annoys me a little bit about electric cars. They're not electric cars until we have hydrogen-propelled vehicles, and we don't have those just yet. So, arrow, very good. This is the science of our high-altitude aircraft, according to a 1950s book that I've got actually here, called Men, Rockets and Space. The book was 1950s, I think. And what you will see there, 1956, what you actually see there on the left, although it's a bit hard to see, this is Charles Yeager, the fellow who was the first person to break the sound barrier. And this is the funny type of gear they put him into to try to prevent him, his blood boiling away and him dying, of course, in the aircraft. This funny looking thing over here was an attempt to ensure that if cabin crew were to survive a mid-air problem with a supersonic aircraft and high-altitude supersonic aircraft, that they could actually jump into one of these things, which looks a bit awkward and a bit weird. But I might add, perhaps no weirder than I'm not sure about what the technology is now, but at the time of the Challenger disaster, which goes back to 1980, 2007 or something, somewhere around there. With that disaster, if you remember, they were asking, well, would the crew have had a chance of escape and that type of thing? Well, in a launch scenario, no, they had no chance of escape. Had they been in space, there are means for them to escape, or at least back in those days. What they had was a ball that was made up of spacesuit material that you had to actually get inside, and someone zipped you up into it, and you'd float around in space until someone collected you. That's what the theory was. I think they'd be collecting dead carcasses themselves, but it's no weirder than that, I think. But just another one of those strange ideas, which I think was probably wrong from the start. The reason for the spacesuits was because they believed they were too expensive. I think that was something like $4 or $5 million per spacesuit, and so these space balls were only $500,000. So do the maths. You'll just get about 5 of those things instead of getting spacesuits. So just hang around in space for a while until you're rescued. Now, the one I really feel sorry for is on the next page. This little guy here. Now, he's actually a Saint Bernard, and he was done up in that gear before men were actually taken up to do that kind of research themselves. And he's in his own little protective suit. He's got his little boots on as well, and he's got his oxygen mask here. And I called it an aero juggernaut, by the way. It wasn't. I don't know what you actually call it.
Cosmo dog.
Cosmo dog, maybe, yeah. Mind you, he wasn't the only dog who going high altitude, but there've been dogs that have gone into space, of course, and have never returned. Not very humane. So that's done on the name of science. I don't really see that myself. Now this is, I thought I'd bring up now about Nikola Tesla. Most of you should, I hope most of you know about Nikola Tesla. He's the fellow who invented alternating current. He did a lot more things than just that, of course. He also invented radio, although he wasn't credited with that until after he died. Now, research has shown, and this is where I'm coming to the little photograph I had at the front of the talk. It's shown theoretical concepts associated with flying saucers. Now, I know some of the theosophists here would probably have wondered when I was going to start talking about flying saucers. This is one of my hobbies as well. And a few of us have been Freemasons, by the way, and according to some internet sites, the 33rd degree Freemasons fly flying saucers. Now, I haven't met any third degree Freemasons. I don't know about you, Don.
I've never done it.
Yeah. And do you know whether they had their own keys, their own flying saucers?
No.
She's just a ground crew.
Oh, ground crew. So, I hadn't heard of it, but anyway.
It might look rather fly around the world.
Well, from what I understand, it's looking pretty quick. A lot quicker than anything we have at the moment. So, with regards to flying saucers, they've gone back to the work of Nikola Tesla, and I spelled his name wrong in the second paragraph. In the first paragraph there, it's spelled the same as it is in the heading, N-I-K, not N-I-C. Apologies. I was busily typing that up this afternoon at about 6. So during the 1890s, would you believe it, his brilliance is something that you could not believe unless you were to get that book there, which I've currently got holding this up, see, so he even has a use when he's long gone. For the uninitiated, as I've mentioned, he was the inventor of alternating current, and thus was the person responsible for lighting the world. He was also one of the scientists suspected of involvement in the Philadelphia experiment, in which attempts at degaussing a naval ship, which of course is the preventing of magnetic sea mines from being attracted to the ships, supposedly resulted in the ship and its crew disappearing from its home port in Philadelphia and its simultaneous reappearance in another port a few hundred miles away at the same time. Now, the result was said to have been horrific for the crew, some of whom melded into the walls and floors of the ship, whilst many suffered horrific burns and others were said to have walked through solid walls later on shore leave. Now, some have claimed to have lost vast amounts of time, whilst some were said to have prematurely aged or gone insane. So there's just a little bit about Nikola Tesla and ported history. I'm not saying it's real. Now, on the next page, this was a model of a radio-controlled robot ship that Tesla built. And it did actually work. It was a remote-controlled ship. This is why he was the inventor of radio. He had this built in the 1890s. Marconi didn't patent his radio until I think 1912, 1910, 1912, somewhere there. And yeah, so he did things like that. He used the applications for radio control. And unfortunately, the Navy, who he was trying to sell this off to, didn't see any point in it. They didn't understand his genius on it. This is an assembly of his alternating current gear. I can't even read it there, so it's a bit small. See, most of these things, I don't know if you read much about his history, but when he was a young fellow living in Serbia, he was walking along and he thought, alternating current, that sounds like a good idea. And it came up in his head with these ideas of how these things would work. That he created these motors and the brushes and all those kind of things, electrical things that go with them. And all of this was designed in his head. And then later he brought it to fruition into real life. This was happened, it was 1893, this was the Columbian exhibition in the Chicago World Fair of 1893. It was when he lit up the world for the first time. Now, his opponent, who was once his boss, Thomas Edison, was very miffed because Edison also had a thing there, a display there, and was nowhere near as good. Hence, from about 1893 onwards, the world became lit up.
Edison was around mainly the alternating current as opposed to this direct current, would result in, everyone being electrocuted sooner or later.
Well,
because it is more dangerous. But,
yes, and if you see what Nikola Tesla wanted to do with it, you'd probably think, maybe it was, and that's about 2 pages away. I'll show you that. But the flying stove is a concept that he also came up with. Now, Nikola Tesla designed what he called a flying stove, in which one person can fly out through an open window. He was also the inventor of radio, but chose not to patent it, as I mentioned before, for voice transmission. Instead, he intended to transmit electricity with it. He envisioned a world where vehicles, cars, boats and aircraft, for example, could extend an antenna and use the broadcast energy to move the vehicle. In a way, this is something like how Dodgem cars work. Now, the Dodgem car has an extended aerial that touches an electrified wire roof that powers the car. Remove the aerial and the vehicle stops. Remove the power and you get the same result. He was also the inventor of the radio-controlled vehicle, using radio signals to transmit movement to boats and submarines. The implications of his work were tremendous. Unfortunately, his full-size power transmission tower mysteriously burned down, oh dear, spelling mistake, just before trials were to begin. Now, Serbian-born and educated, Nikola Tesla ended his days as a pauper naturalised American. Some say that he had gathered a considerable number of enemies.
very powerful enemy, such as Thomas Edison, who had at one time employed him but had become jealous of his discoveries and tried to discredit him. This was certainly the case when looking at their bitter rivalry at the World Expo in 1893, which I just showed you, in which Tesla's alternating current light system was far brighter and dazzling than Edison's yellowish direct current system. As a result, Tesla's system won out and the world began to electrify using alternating current. Now, in this photo here, we have a few famous fellows. This, of course, is Einstein. Now, I'm not sure who the little short fellow is. Charles Steinmetz. Anyone heard of him? Steinmetz? Yeah. And of course, this fellow here is Nikola Tesla, and it doesn't say who this fellow here is. Unlucky for him, I guess. But that was taken in 1921, in a visit to the RCA Transoceanic Station at New Brunswick, New Jersey. At the time, Tesla was deeply involved in his patent dispute with Marconi. Only after his death would the US Supreme Court uphold Tesla's claim to be the true father of radio. This thing here is actually the transmission tower for the power that he was going to transmit throughout the world. This particular one was going to transmit energy across the Atlantic Ocean, but it seriously burnt down. I think only about 2 or 3 days before it was going to send out a test transmission. So, it doesn't say there, and I couldn't take it out of this.
It's like it take a lot to get to learn in the first place.
More you would think, but I'll
Is it timber?
Yeah, even though if it were timber, though,
Yeah.
I don't know if it is timber actually. It might look a little bit like that, but I don't think it's metal. But if what was I looking for? Oh, yes. One of the things. This was a rendition of what he wanted to try to, or what he envisioned he would be able to do. Now, there's his tower there, that's the photograph there, but this is an artist's rendition of it powered up, and it had, in this instance, there was a war going on, and they were all being powered by this electricity being generated.
Hit the camera.
Sorry. So the problem, as far as I could see, was that you have all this electricity buzzing around your head, and what's to say your head may not act like an aerial? and
take the first class.
So yeah, bit of a worry. But, whether it would have worked or not.
Door open on your microwave, eh?
Sorry?
Like having the door open on your microwave while it's going.
Maybe so. And of course, we don't know because, well, I suppose we've never really tried it, have we? So, have you tried the microwave?
You've got lots of switches on to stop running them all over.
You ever tried to melt butter with a that's in the foil in a microwave? That'll spark any time. Okay, so the Avro-Abraca, that's what appeared on the first on the cover, which is happening there. That's actually only a replica of it. But the real Avro-Abraca, Avro is a company that makes aircraft. Now, shortly after, and it's a Canadian company, and shortly after World War II, a team of scientists actually came up with this design for a flying saucer. So it was an example of craft built in an effort to mimic the flying saucer phenomenon, including the craft shown in this lecture's handout. Now, it was known as Avro and was built by 10 Canadian scientists. They hoped that the craft, which was powered by a jet engine, which was centrally located, but it's a kind of a disc-shaped, traditional flying saucer type shape, and in the centre of it, at the top, is where the jet engine is. Now it's only a very small craft because on either side you have the pilot on one side and an observer on the other side. Fairly small, you can imagine the noise. Now, how it was propelled, supposedly, was that it had underneath it, it had around the circumference, it had a slit through which the jet air, the jet's super speed, what do you call it? Jet propelled air was forced through to the slit, and that was supposedly to create the lift for the vehicle. One of the things the Canadians found out pretty early on in their design was that it just wasn't going to work. It was more a ground effect machine than a flying saucer. Now, a ground effect machine is something like, for example, a holocraft. Yeah. And it got probably about a metre and a half off the ground, and that's about the extent of what it did. About a metre and a half off the ground, hurt people's ears, and they then flogged it off to the Americans, who bought it for a large sum of money. The Americans then spent something like $100 million US 1956 money and tried to improve it.
Now they call it a Harrier jet. Harrier jet works the same way.
Yeah, well, not
like
quite.
A downward thrust.
Yes, but not quite the same, no, because this is just a circular device and not and didn't have the ability to have any other propulsion methods. But so originally they thought that they'd be able to get about 2,000 kilometres per hour, I think. Now the Americans are sort of saying they bought it, but the thing that really gets me is considering the fact that the Americans were at the time considered to be leaders in the field of aeronautical engineering. Why was it that they didn't understand that this thing wasn't going to work for $100 million worth of fiddling with it? And why couldn't they change the propulsion system? Conspiracy theorists, and I'm perhaps one of them, have suggested that it was to prove in an overt way that humans could not build flying saucers and that the technology belongs to the aliens. A cover story to deny that technology was human and far in advance of the American. So, proof that I think that Freemasons perhaps do fly their own flying saucers and not the other way.
Also reptilian shape.
Oh yes, and the shape of it. But some say that they're Freemasons as well.
Yes.
So, so this is a very good photo. This is actually a photo of the Avatar being assembled. You can see here that's one of the cockpit canopies that's actually been lifted up. That's one there too. There's the central jet there, and it's around the end, around the circumference where that slit is, that the jet air is forced through to give it some lift. Not very successful, as I mentioned. As you'll see in the next photos, this is the actual vehicle in flight. Now there is actually a person walking behind it. That's not a pair of legs. That's not this guy's legs. It's really it actually bloke walking past, just like this is a bloke walking past. He's got his headphones on there, and I would imagine the other bloke would too, because it's very noisy. And you can see here that it's only be less than a metre off the ground, and that's about as far as it ever got off the ground. And that was top secret for many, many, many years. Mind you, these are great photos. Yeah, you can see it there in this photograph. From there, you can see they're not his legs. Yeah. Okay, so now I thought I'd go on to something a little bit different. Some little known facts. Now, setting fractured bones. Now, a pulley was used in Roman times to set fractured bones. The first drawing of a pulley is an Assyrian relief dated around 870 BC. Now, another one from technology, again, sorry, not technology, but from history. The earliest vending machine was probably the one which is known to have dispensed holy water at a Greek temple in the 3rd century BC. You know, they make money, didn't they? Then there was the Chinese, who were known to have sold pencils through coin-operated machines as early as AD 1076. And the first known example of transplant surgery was performed around 600 BC by Hindu surgeons in India who devised a method of reconstructing noses by removing a flap of skin from the patient's arm and grafting it onto his nose. Now, I don't know if any of you ever looked at a book on plastic surgery, particularly plastic surgery from the 1950s. That's exactly what they did do. They graft the arm to the nose, and because you needed the living tissue, and in those days they didn't know how to get the tissue to live other than like with a petri dish or anything. You had to actually sew the nose up like that to the arm and wait for the thing to grow and then cut it off, and then away you go with your new piece of skin.
Because I don't think there is blood supply.
Yeah, blood supply. Yeah. And they didn't have an understanding in those
I've
days.
actually seen it.
Yeah.
You're showing your age.
600 BC.
We've heard stories. Now, this is something else again. Now, I've got a DVD here which I picked up. It was only fairly cheap too. It was one of those $5 baskets. And this was Nukes in Space. Now, I'd heard about this personally quite a few years ago. There is evidence that during the Kennedy years at least, there were several detonations of nuclear weapons in space. And that the reason for that was to see whether they could get an advantage on the other side. Now, the Russians did the same thing. And there are reports that something like 20 to 40 nukes, somewhere between 20 and 40 nukes, were exploded in space by both the Americans and the Russians, as I mentioned. Now, several were supposed to have been detonated, as I said, during the Kennedy years. Now, firstly, this was how scientists were able to study the effects of electromagnetic pulse, which getting caught up in without getting caught up in a tit-for-tat nuclear confrontation. Now, with regards to this, rumours abound to this day that one such detonation occurred in a stationary, I forgot how to spell geostationary orbit, that's why I've written a stationary orbit, above Hawaii in the early 1960s. Now, the result, widespread loss of communications and electrical circuits, was reported to have caused utter mayhem. Now, secondly, scientists now look for ways to make this EMP effect occur, divorced of a nuclear explosion. This was seen as a major way to deafen and blind an enemy to your invasion of them. Military scientists hastily worked to achieve this end. Now, I'm personally convinced, and perhaps this is the conspiracy theorist in me once again, that the Auckland, New Zealand event a few years ago was the testing of an EMP weapon by the Americans before they used the weapon on an enemy. And in this case, the enemy was the Bosnian, in the Bosnian conflict, where a new weapon was said to have been employed. It was actually reported on the news that this weapon was employed by NATO forces and had been used, and that it wiped out electrical circuitry but left buildings intact.
What was the Auckland, New Zealand event?
Well, a couple of years ago, in Auckland, New Zealand, there was a severe, major loss of electrical power in the city, and a lot of their circuits were fried, etc. The suggestion was that the Americans might have been testing one of their devices on a friendly, rather use it on a friendly than an enemy. Now, this appeared in a magazine. Which one it is? One of these. This is Popular Science. This is an Australian version of Popular Science. I've bought a couple of issues of it. I'm not sure which one it is. I can't read things. Oh yes, right. How's that? It's called the blackout bomb. Now that, by any other, just by the fact of the name, that is an EMP weapon. Without even mentioning that it's an EMP weapon, anything that says blackout bomb, it's an EMP weapon. And when you look at it, it says how microwaves kill electronics. So obviously the weapon does exist, and they have been using it. They, scientists. So I'll just digress once more. On this occasion, unrelated question to what we're talking about. Does anyone here know what a fax machine is? Any guesses?
This is a derivation of teletext machine.
It was code.
19th century.
Dots and dashes. Oh, when they had like telegraph.
Getting close. Very close. Believe it or not, the invention of the fax machine. The first fax machine was invented by Scottish mechanic and inventor Alexander Bain. In 1843, Alexander Bain received a British patent for improvements in reducing and regulating electric currents and improvements in timepieces and in electric printing and signal telegraphs. In layman's terms, a fax machine. Now, not a fax machine as we know it today, but still it was something that was able to convert electrical impulses and to be able to give a basic signal. Now, it wasn't until 1860, that the fax machine called the pantelegraph, which sent it from Paris to Lyon, sent the first fax message. Now, in its first year, sent 5,000 messages. Now, of course, after that, they changed a great deal. They started doing things like photographs and the like. But photographs didn't come into it until about, I think, 1914. Yeah. So, which explains why it is that if you've ever seen any of the newspapers from World War I, that era, that they actually had photographs from the front line, and they were only, like a day or so from the front. It was because they were able to do it in that way.
But that'd be very low resolution.
Oh yeah,
extremely low.
Yeah. But still, nowhere near what we've got now. And it's like television. Television was invented fairly early. I mean, yes, they had Alexander Graham Bell, Alexander Bell invented it. But there were precursors to that television, which were made something like 30 or 40 years before that, and they only had a resolution of like 2 or 3 lines, as opposed to like we've got 500 and something, 600 and something now. The one that Bayer used had 31 lines, but the ones that were invented before that, which really couldn't be called television, but they used techniques that television used, had about 2 or 3 lines, which you couldn't see anything, it's just a couple of lines.
And I understand that the Crookes globe, which is the sits in the television set, which captures the images, etc., was invented by William Crookes, who was a theosophist that works with Batsby.
Okay. There you go. And again, it was a few years before beds had actually
The Crookes tube, I think it's called,
Yeah.
something like a tube.
Yeah, so. Oh, here's one more. These are some of the, they're considered to be amongst the believers in Nazi Germany's flying saucer technologists, that these actually went into production. There is conspiracy theories that suggest that at the end of World War II, something like about 70 or 80 U-boats went missing and were not accounted for in the war and that type of thing. And what was suggested was that shortly before the war started, the Germans had gone to Antarctica. They'd found an area there that they could cultivate, and that they went underground there and built huge things there. And with the disappearance of the submarines, the world's navies at the end of World War II decided to mount an expedition to Antarctica to see if there was any truth to it. According to the theorists, conspiracy theorists, what happened was that they came back with their tail between their legs. They'd been soundly defeated by a superior enemy using flying saucers. And it was supposed to have been this type.
The V-throughs?
Sorry?
V-throughs?
Well, yeah. There were several advanced types of rocket, like you had like the V2. There were movements for the V3, etc. And then they had the Virilovs, and these are the show these ones. They used supposedly a vortex system, and I don't understand it in any single way that helped them fly. Their craft was supposed to be able to travel at something like 2,000 to 3,000 kilometres per hour or faster. If they were real, if they did exist, my thought is the only reason they weren't brought into production was there weren't enough of them, they didn't have enough people trained to fly them, and if that was the case, obviously if you had a craft that was that superior, you would have won the war, without any doubt. It's like the jet engine, the jet aircraft that they built, they had the Messerschmitt. Had they had a few of those in production prior to the end of the war, I think they only had like half a dozen or something in production. Had they had a fleet of them, they would quite possibly have turned the tide of the war. The same with these things. The ability to fly quickly, to be able to move your troops, whatever, would have been the winning point of any war, particularly when everyone else only had pop through. So this is the next thing. This comes out of one of these books again too. Don't know if you can see it all that well, but I call it big and rich boys' toys. Usually, you say big boys' toys. Well, in this one I think it's big and rich because one, all boys would like to play with something like that, so all big boys like to play with that. But it costs about $150,000. So that's why I don't think anyone can afford one. What they are, or what it is a water-powered jetpack. Now you've all seen the jet-propelled ones that they've only got enough fuel in them to fly, perhaps, from here to the other side of the showground, and then they close down the rack, they get an applause, and they run away. Well, these things, the way it works. I don't know if you can see that, but that's a modified jet ski down the bottom there. And what it does, it actually pumps water into this yellow hose here that goes up behind the jetpack. And the jetpack itself has these nozzles here that the water goes through and is thrown out, ejected into those, which creates the lift. Now it can get about 3 or 4 stories high, so it's a bit of a thrill, no doubt. But again, you have to have about $150,000 to buy one. So I'm not going to be getting one anytime soon. I wouldn't mind a ride on one, but and there it is there. That's him up here, that little bit there. That's it. So, just some men's toys. Now, next to last is this here. Again, this comes from these popular science magazines, Australian ones. On the left here, this is a photograph of what they call the touchy-feely, and it's talking about circuitry, which is now stretchy. They have an ability to stretch the circuitry so that it actually moves with the touch. And what they believe they're able to do is create touch and feel with these type of things. And so eventually you're going to be having androids and that type of thing with an ability to be able to know when they're touching something or bumping into something, and not have the kind of thing like before where it was just sensors and that type of thing. This is actually a real feeling of touching something. So that's interesting. The other thing that I thought I'd put in there was just about statistics. Science is about statistics, and here we have something about 40,000 to 1. Now that ratio is about people dying in car crashes versus roller coasters. 40,000 to 1. And yet, most people are scared of being killed in a roller coaster than they are in a car. Go figure.
Probably spend more time in the car.
Now, this one here, 1 to 1 million is the annual risk of dying in a commercial plane crash. Again, you've got to go in aeroplanes a fair bit too, I imagine. This one here, 40%, it's the percentage of deaths worldwide that can be attributed to pollution. One good reason why we should clean up the environment. 6 is the average number of people killed worldwide by these things. Sharks. 4,000 to 1 is the ratio. Of people killed every year by lightning strikes versus the number of people killed by shark attacks. So 4,000 to 1. And finally, 36,000 is the average number of Americans who die every year from the flu. My concluding remarks. No one can deny the important role science has played in our lives. Think for a moment what our lives would be like without electricity. And then what about life without any form of technology, farming equipment, etc. Perhaps it would be fair to say that without science, without technology, we would be in the dark ages, or worse still, at the edge of the swamp, waiting to evolve.
Is that what we saw?
Maybe.
Well, maybe.
Thank you.
You know where to go. It's pretty bright, isn't it?
So how did you find all this information?
How?
Yeah. Like off the internet?
Spent youth.
It's been a bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Magazines, video, DVD, books, book, and other ones.
So do you ever see like Tesla, if like scientists ever recreate Tesla's inventions of it, like that big tower?
Well, I'm sure, they may have double thought that one, but as to his other stuff, if you look at any of the research on any of the research on, where is it? What was the question?
Recreating Tesla's inventions.
Oh yeah. Well, it was only about 10 years ago that one of the treasure chests full of Tesla inventions were, not inventions themselves, but the research for them was found in Serbia. He had a lot of stuff with relatives there or something. I think it'll probably be 20, 30, maybe even 50 years before we see any of those things.
There was an episode of Mythbusters which they were testing his earthquake machine, and they started off shooting it was going to be another myth, and they ended up thinking this is getting a bit scary. What are you going to bring us down? But stopped it.
Because he also did, I don't know if you heard of, mechanical resonance. That was his theory, or one of his theories was that if you produce the right the mechanical resonance, you could actually split the Earth in two, like a hot knife going through butter. That was his theory. Now I hope that we don't see that happen. But he was a very clever bloke. Some of the things he did. This is an illustration of. Turn off. This is an illustration of one of the demonstrations he gave at the American Institute of Electrical Engineers at Columbia College, in which he held up he had a metal sheet on either side of the room, and he walked through it with fluorescent tubes, and he lit them up, that type of thing. And it'll hold heap of different experiments and scared the world really. As the things they saw him do with them. I don't think it's going to work that one. There's one shot. Now, the guy must have been deaf. He was. I'm not sure. Yeah, this is. Okay, so this is in his Colorado Springs laboratory, in which he's sitting calmly down and reading while several million volts of cascading electricity are flying around him. No, you don't know when he didn't hear that. He had been deaf. Yeah.
He was a showman.
Oh, he was. He was also a bit eccentric. I mean, he had some obsessive compulsive disorders, where if he went to something like eating, if he was going to eat at a restaurant or something, he'd have to clean his plate about 5 times or something before he'd eat off it, and he'd have to see every knife and fork and spoon, he'd have to clean them and before he even ate, and he'd have to prepare for his meal about an hour before he was going to eat it.
You need to press it again. If yes, please press that button again. Now again. Because it went off, you need to do it again. You need to press it off while the thing's on.
Got it?
Now take your finger off here.
Something that you mentioned before, Tony, about the Philadelphia experiment.
Yep.
Well, how's that now in the context of history now? It's over, been done. What's the modern thing? Was it all bunkum? Or has anyone found out anything more about it? They sold a lot of books or what?
Well, they have sold a lot of books. It really does depend on what you believe. Unless you actually meet someone who comes from the Philadelphia experiment, I don't think you'll ever know. Because it's one of those things that if it was real, it was pretty amazing, but scary. And considering that supposedly these guys, some of them were had become fused with the ship, living dead really. You'd have to really, I mean, it'd have to be in the realm of either science fiction or if it was real, it's going to be top secret for years to come. No one's going to know about it.
The other one was Stephen Dale was on television. It was in the morning chat show. I read the book, but it was fashionable.
Yeah, conspiracy.
Conspiracy. Everybody was reading it.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand it. And pictures of flying saucers and all this gibberish.
Yeah, well, so he was supposed to have worked in area S4 of Area 51, and he didn't know that he was working there. He only found out he was working there when he was hypnotised one time, and all of a sudden the memories came back. They'd been supposedly working there and helping to back engineer a spacecraft that they captured, and another fellow who had a similar thing was Bob Lazar, who had similar claims. Whether they are real or not, you don't. How are you going to know unless you actually go there? And who's going to let you go there if it's such a secret place? And it's above top secret. I mean, you ever seen the Russian space shuttle? The Russian space shuttle. Sorry?
Buran, or starts with B.
Oh, I don't know the name of it, but all I know is that in 1985, it was, when I was in the Air Force, we saw it. We photographed it. An Orion aircraft had captured it not in the flight. Now, the Americans had a rather strange, the Russians had a rather strange way of doing things. Where the Americans splashed down in the ocean with their little command modules for their Apollo spacecraft and things like that, and they put their space shuttles on Earth, the Russians did it the other way around. They put their little space capsules on the hard Earth and their space shuttle in the water in the Indian Ocean. I don't know why that was the case. I only just thought of that the other day, actually. I've only been, how many years? 24 years. And I've only just thought, hang on, what was it doing in the ocean? My only thought about that was, well, maybe that was just so that the West couldn't see it. They were trying to show off that they had one of their own. It was only a small one by comparison, only about a quarter of the size of the American space shuttle. And it was only a tester. But they did have a full-scale one as well. But I don't think it's ever gone into flight.
They had a model one in Sydney for 2000 Olympics.
Yeah, maybe so. But they never actually put it in the sky.
No.
Okay. We'll wind you up now. So you can catch Tony at the end anyway, and you're all welcome to stay for a cup of tea. So continue to discuss and enjoy yourself, but we'll just let Tony back up now. Thanks.
Hey.
Always fascinating your talks.
Always very interesting, yes.
Here, Tony, I'll take
magazine that cost $2 and the money
Millions of dollars
for the birth of the Afghani
where's the stop mode?
It was a good pen, mind you. It really makes you wonder why we think.